and hit record, see if I can get this one to be the one we need to use, and share the screen. Now, of course, the big topic in political science naturally would be this election. And what we're hoping for is a very decisive election, right? And so here we have one day to go before the election. And I'm not going to play a bunch of clips or a bunch of ads and things like we do in poli sci, but I am going to alert you to this is the most important election in American history. I can already tell you that it's going to be the biggest turnout we've ever had in the history of the country. We've never had this many people vote early, over 100 million by the end of the day. Last time we only had 130 million, less than that, vote total. And we're not even to election day. We could surpass the previous record by 20, 30 million people. It's the most anticipated, most important election in my lifetime, and everybody else I know. Everyone says it. This is the number one election of our lifetime. And so plan a party with your family. Now, again, we don't get political in this class. We don't talk one side or the other and that kind of thing. This is world history, right? We got enough to do with the Romans, but here's the thing: you should watch it. You start about 5 o'clock, checking in, and every half hour. Well, at 5:30, they're going to release Florida results at about 5:30 our time. That's 7:30 their time as polls close, and then just keep tracking it for about the next 2 days, really. But the big action, of course, is that night somewhere between say 7 o'clock and right around midnight to see, what's happening there in this election. And it's right now, the probabilities are that Joe Biden will win if we believe the polls, but the polls have been wrong before, so we're not going to go much by that. We do know Florida is a key state, and there's certain sections of Florida that can kind of tell us in advance who has the best chance to win. For example, if Joe Biden can get 43% or above in this area around Tampa Bay right here, so they'll show maps and they'll show county by county what the vote count is. And if Joe Biden is overperforming, which would be above 43%, then he's got a really good chance to win. However, if down in this area, which is Biden country, if his voters don't turn out in big numbers, then he's toast. And up in this end of the state is President Trump's section. And so if he does really well here, Biden doesn't do so well here, Biden only hits 41% here, then Mr. Trump's going to win the state of Florida. And Florida is one of the very key states in this election. The next one is Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is going to be weird because as you're watching, don't get put off by the early results. Let's go back to Florida really fast. With Florida, here's the problem. They count now. They're good at counting. They counting all the absentee, all this kind of stuff, the mail-in ballots like we do in Utah. We mail them in. They're doing all that now. So they'll have early results, and Biden should probably be in the lead by the end of the first couple of hours. Now, Trump's biggest percentage of voters are in another time zone, so their polls don't close for an hour later. So if Biden pulls out to an early lead, how big is that lead? Is it big enough to be a cushion? Because Mr. Trump's going to play catch up, and he could pass Biden at some point, maybe even tomorrow in Florida. Who knows? Sometimes it goes to the next day, the next day, the next day. Sometimes it takes a week to count these states. Pennsylvania is one of those states. Pennsylvania is really critical, right? I'm going to give you all the key states here in a second. But Pennsylvania is really critical. Last time it went for Trump. Before that, it went for President Obama. So they're different political parties, right? So this is what we call a swing state. It could go either direction. Could swing toward Biden, could swing toward Trump. But in this state, because the same day vote is counted right away, those are the people that show up on election day, it's going to maybe show a Trump lead. But all the ballots, and we're talking about millions of ballots that have come in early vote, they won't be counted till the next day. So we might not know who won this, and it could be that Biden wins by a sizable amount, but we won't know it for several days, maybe, right? Depends on how big of an election is. So don't get fooled by the early returns. In Florida, advantage early Biden. In Pennsylvania, advantage early Trump. And then in this state, Pennsylvania, it's Biden that's going to be playing catch up. All right. Now, Georgia is one of those states that everybody thought Mr. Trump would win without a problem. But right now it's neck and neck. And Mr. Biden even traveled down there to campaign. They got a shot at taking it. So that's one to watch too. And they released their vote early. And if Mr. Trump holds on to Georgia, then he's got a real good shot. If he doesn't, it's over pretty much. So keep your eye on Georgia. All right, now what I'm going to do is go to this site here. And if you want to do this with your family, I think it'd be great fun. One of the sites we go to a lot is called 538.com. And it's the one that gives the probabilities of winning. Doesn't mean it has to happen, but it means likely, given what people are saying today, this could happen. And so what you can do is go down to this site on the poli-sci page. So you go over to the poli-sci page, not the history page, and click on this link right here, projects538.com. Let's make sure that link is working. Okay, so, okay, now here it is. Now this is a great, great site. And here's how you use it. Okay, so let me make it a little smaller so you can see. Up here are all the swing states, the ones that could go either direction, right? Some states are baked in. For example, we know North Dakota is going to vote for Mr. Trump, and we pretty much know California is going to vote for Mr. Biden, right? We know that. But what about the states that are going to make the decision? Well, they're all listed right here across the top. So as votes start to come in, you can start predicting the probabilities. Now, right now, look at the probabilities, 10% for Mr. Trump, 89% for Mr. Biden. But let's say Trump wins Florida convincingly. Suddenly look at the odds. Without any other states, he's now gone to a 30% chance, right? Even higher. Look at that, 32%. So he jumps up 22%. What if he wins Georgia? Whoa. What if he wins North Carolina? Whoa. And suddenly he's president. The states to watch are Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. But if Biden wins any one of them, look what happened to the probabilities. So all Biden has to do is win one of those three. The president has got to win all three. And then he's got to flip Florida to be safe, right? Because even at that, right now, even at that, Biden still wins. You need 270 to win. So let's say the president does flip Pennsylvania, then he's president, and that's all there is to it. The other key state to watch, I'm going to click on it right here. So I'm going to click on North Carolina because it's one to watch too. And then it's Arizona. Arizona, Mr. Trump won it easily 4 years ago. Right now, it doesn't look so safe for him. Those are the states that probably will decide it. If you get any states that do something weird, like say Ohio turns blue or Michigan turns red, red for Democrats, blue for Democrats, red for Republicans. Any of those little weird things happen, then it's a whole different ballgame, right? So you can track it. The first two states that will come in are going to be Trump states. Kentucky's going to be first, and then along with Indiana, and that changes the probabilities. So you can just keep this open on your computer, and as they announce results in the election, you can always reset, but as they announce results, you can go in and click on these, and you can determine the probability of the election. And maybe before it ever gets to our time zone and you have our votes, you can pretty well know who won. We think, we hope, we don't know. Depends on how close it is. And that's the thing about elections, right? This is better than any sporting event. This is bigger than the Super Bowl, right? Because the Super Bowl has no consequence on American lives. It doesn't matter who wins. I bet you can't even tell me who won the last Super Bowl. And most people don't even watch the Super Bowl anymore, right? I mean, World Cup, maybe a few more people watch that. But this actually has real consequences, not just on American history, but on world history too. And so we've been kind of making that point. And again, not being political, not supporting one side or the other. This is not the class for that. Political science is the class for that. And that's 2 years away. But let's go ahead then and get to our Roman lecture, because they had their politics too. I mean, did they ever, as you guys have learned, right? And we're going to give you guys a study guide, not tonight, not tomorrow night, but Wednesday night, because I want to clear the schedule. And I went through and graded all the work as of Sunday night. So I'm all caught up. We've got the first Roman study guide done, the 2 Greek study guides done. Hopefully more of you have turned in work, because at least on that Roman one, there a lot of work wasn't done yet. But if you can catch up, then the next study guide drops on Wednesday. And but I want to clear the schedule, because I think it's more important to watch this election than do a silly study guide for me, right? Okay, well, let's go ahead and get back into the Romans so we are ready for that next study guide. And yeah, so Rome history, part 4. And like I said, we kind of made the decision that if we have limited time, let's do at least the subjects we're going to cover well, instead of just doing it haphazardly and people can't remember the important bits and so on, and no review and all that. Let's not do that. Let's actually zone in and do a good job with the Greeks. Let's zone in, do a good job with the Romans, like we did with Egypt and Mesopotamia. So let's go ahead then and start lecture 22. Now, we all know, we're going to review here, who Cincinnatus was, right? Way back at the beginning of the Republic, when the Republic got attacked, and one of their armies was surrounded, they called on Cincinnatus, a farmer, comes out of retirement because he'd been a general, and he saves Rome. And then he does something unique. He walked away from power. Now, that's kind of important. Look, whoever loses this election needs to walk away and be gracious to the winner. That's the way this is supposed to work. That's the lesson that George Washington learned from Cincinnatus, is if you win, be gracious. Congratulate your opponent on a great campaign, and then go on and do good things for the country. That's kind of the spirit of it. But if you lose, you also should retire gracefully with class and not try to hold on to power. And Washington, we know that he walked away from power not once, but twice. He could have literally decided, I want to be the king of America. And he could have been the king of America. He could have been Julius Caesar, American style. He crossed his own Rubicon. We talked about the Rubicon, right? Some of the classes got this lecture, some didn't. But George Washington, at a fateful moment in the American Revolution, 1776, with time running out, his troops had 2 weeks left to serve with him, and that was it. And then he had no army. And he'd suffered some humiliating defeats at the hands of the British in Manhattan and Brooklyn and in New Jersey. And he lost 9,000 men. He only had 1,200, maybe 12,000, to start with. He was down to about 2,000 or so men. Had to do something dramatic. Well, he did. Christmas Day, Boxing Day, actually. He crosses the Delaware River in the middle of the night, shocks the garrison that was at Trenton, shocks Princeton, wins a big victory out of nowhere. A man who had never seen a battlefield victory yet in the entire war wins two like that and changes the course of American history. Not only he did his victories with something to cheer about if you're wanting the American Revolution to succeed, but also it meant that troops came and signed up for the next spring to get ready to fight that next year. And without those victories, nobody shows up because they say, hey, this guy can't win. Why am I going to go join that army? Right? So he crossed his Rubicon, as did Julius Caesar. The difference between Julius Caesar and Cincinnatus and George Washington is Washington walked away from power. He did it for his country. And he walked away. That's why he's an American legend. That's why he's part of our mythology, because Washington led us through some of our most difficult times and then said, okay, I'm going back to my farm like Cincinnatus. I'm not going to do everything I can to hold on to power or to milk it for every dime I can get out of it. That wasn't his way. And that became the way for all presidents, that's how they should act. So we have our mythology, just like the Romans did. But guess what? Julius Caesar isn't going to buy that mythology. Julius Caesar is going to break that to bits. Julius Caesar is going to take his army, battle hardened from all those 10 years of war in what we now call France, Gaul, back to those guys, they would call it Gaul. And he would cross the Rubicon against the orders of the Senate, and the other powerful general named Pompey said, hey, I got my army over in Greece. You shouldn't bring your army near Rome either. This should be a city where, we're not having armies decide who our leaders are. And Caesar marched his army straight in. Washington had that same chance. His officers, fed up with not being paid, not being treated right, but Congress says, hey, we're going to march, take over the government, put Washington in charge. He'll fix it. Washington said, no, I'm not going to do that. Not only that, guys, and he pulls all the officers together. It's called the Officers' Rebellion. Pulls all the officers together in a bar up in upstate New York, sets them down, and tries to explain to them why, democracy and freedom is different than, it was in Rome under Caesar. And they were, in disbelief. They thought they were going to make him the first king of America. But he had gotten older, and he reaches into his pocket and pulls out his reading glasses, which nobody had ever seen him wear before. And you know how they sit on your nose, right? They always just sit kind of weird like that. And he pulls out a letter from a congressman promising to do more to try to help them. And he reads that letter. And no sooner did he start reading the letter, he said, I have grown both gray and blind in your service. So pardon me, I need to put my glasses on so I can read this. And they broke into tears. And the officers' rebellion dissipated and went away. You know what happened to Caesar? Different story. He's up in England, of all places, near York. And they have a thing called acclamation. It was a kind of a shout, if you will, from the troops of a successful general, an imperator. They had this big shout, imperator. Okay, so they shouted he was so great that they were willing to go and make him ruler of Rome, and they followed him all the way back to Rome. He conquered the city. That's the difference between George Washington and Julius Caesar. The difference between Cincinnatus and Caesar. Caesar was very ambitious, no doubt about it. But there was another ambitious guy, was Pompey. And you guys remember Pompey, right? We talked last time how he used the life of this Mithridates, you know, the sixth, that he was sent out there to kill, and Mithridates hid, and he spent the next years conquering more territory than any Roman had for a long, long time. He fancied himself the next Alexander the Great. At the same time that Julius Caesar is out in Gaul adding new territories. He was the first Roman leader to travel to England and made that part of the of the Roman Empire. So both of these guys had delusions of grandeur. Look at me now. They both thought that they were the reincarnation of Alexander the Great. Now that's probably not where you want to be headspace wise, but that's where they were. And Caesar, at least, thought he was part divine like Alexander was, or at least they believed he was. So when you get these two guys with these enormous egos together, right, you got to do something. And it was Crassus that kind of figured out what to do. Crassus, being the wealthy guy, he's saying, how can we all make money at this and not fight each other? Because I got an army. Pompey, you have your army. Pompey, you fought some of the most important battles in Roman history. And Caesar, you went up there and fought a bunch of tribes and stuff and captured a lot of slaves and that, but you made it sound like it was really, really tough. People believe that you're the greatest Roman. At least that's the way Caesar portrayed himself in his writings, as he'd send his messages back to Rome about how great he was. Three of the biggest egos on the planet. So they come up with this. Why don't we all rule together? So much for the Roman Senate. Yeah, they kept the Senate around. Senators still did their thing, but they were basically a debating society now, because the powers were these guys. And this is called the First Triumvirate. Now, this is really important to know, because it's going to be a very important thing for you to know when it comes to the next study guide that drops on Wednesday. I won't give it to you until then, because I want you focusing on the election if you're so interested. But nevertheless, they divided Rome amongst themselves. And I think in some of the classes we actually covered this already, where the richest part, Crassus, was out there just gobbling up all the wealth. And then you, of course, had Italy, where the power source was, and that's where Pompey was. And he had his army over here in Dalmatia. And then you had Caesar, who the areas he fought in, and then these areas here that was once part of Carthage, right? So that went on for about 10 years, right? But this is not going to last forever, because no sooner did Caesar feel like he'd done everything he could do out here in Gaul to conquer, he comes and crosses the Rubicon River in violation of the order of the Senate. And Pompey ran the Senate. Don't make many mistakes of that. So it was really a power struggle between Pompey, the famous general who'd conquered the East. I mean, let's go back and look at the map. He conquered Syria, Mesopotamia. He conquered Phoenicia. He conquered this area. He had been an amazing general. And this was going to be a lot tougher than what Caesar did. He even had a bigger army, you should know. And then he kind of had, Crassus support. So when Caesar crossed the Rubicon with the famous words, the die is cast, there's no going back, victory or death, yeah, it was probably for real. But Pompey and the Senate didn't think he'd actually do it. So the city was undefended. So in comes Caesar with this battle-hardened army. And remember, the armies now, because of Marius and Sulla, those two previous generals, they're now loyal to their general, not to the state of Rome. They're not fighting for Rome anymore. They're fighting for their general because they know if their general wins, they're going to get wealthier, right? Can't tell you how many times that Julius Caesar gave his victorious legions, when they conquered some tribe or some village or whatever, allowed them to grab a certain number of slaves and sell them for a profit as a bonus to their regular pay. I know that sounds hideous and terrible, and it is. But those Roman legions weren't in it at this point for the good of the country, like our military is. Our military is there to preserve, protect, and defend the United States. These guys were there to preserve, protect, and defend their general. So things have changed. And after about 10 years, the triumvirate breaks down. And what happens then is Pompey, after he crossed the Rubicon, right, Caesar does, Pompey goes over to his troops over here in Greece. And there's some big battles, and they fight all over. They fight in North Africa, near where Carthage was. They fight in Spain. You can see all the little battles here. There's all sorts of battles going on. And guess what? Caesar wins a few, Pompey wins a few, but finally it came down to this battle right here in this part of Greece, right? Called for Pharsalus. And at Pharsalus, an outnumbered Julius Caesar, he was outnumbered, who had to sneak across the Adriatic because Pompey had a fleet out here trying to block him from crossing, but he managed to get his troops over. So he didn't have full strength. And yet he outmaneuvered one of the great generals of the era and wins that battle. Pompey then gets on a ship and decides, well, look, I'm going to go down to Egypt, because he'd cultivated a good relationship with Egypt when he conquered all that area in Palestine and all that area in the Phoenician world. He made them allies of Rome. They agreed to be allies of Rome. And there was a Ptolemaic king there. And Ptolemy, that meant he came from Macedonia, right? Because remember, because of Alexander the Great, Egypt is being ruled by Greeks from Macedonia. That's the Ptolemaic family. Ptolemy was the family name. And he travels there thinking, I'm going to get an ally. They're rich. I'm going to rebuild my army. We're going to go back at Caesar. This isn't over yet. And guess what? That Ptolemaic king assassinated him because he didn't want to mess with Caesar, because he saw that Caesar would probably win. And Egypt wasn't as strong as it used to be. It was fighting amongst itself as to who the successor should be. I mean, it was really, really weird. Here's that battle. Here's that blockade I told you about. Bravely and daringly in the middle of the night, Caesar crosses and gets past that blockade and takes on his main army here and wins that fateful battle. Now, the Ptolemaic king in Egypt kills him. Caesar then becomes the absolute dictator of Rome. Yeah, he took on the title dictator. I'm in charge. I'm awesome. I'm part God. Everybody's got to do what I say now. And the Senate is going, oh my goodness, we just had a change of government. It's called a coup d'etat. Completely took over the government and took it away from the rightfully appointed leaders, right? Now, he did a lot of good there. He was leader for quite a while. I mean, he passed some economic reforms and all this kind of stuff. He rewarded his troops. He didn't do all bad things. Even the worst dictators in the history of the world did some good things, or at least tried to, because you want to become important and famous, right? You don't want to be seen as an evil dictator. But his political enemies wanted to go back to the Roman Republic. The senators were upset. And it was one of, I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. It was one of Caesar's best friends, Marcus Brutus, who had all this pressure put upon him to remember his family mythology and history. It was a Brutus that in 509 got rid of Tarquin the Proud. And a conspiracy was organized, and here's Brutus, the famous Shakespeare line, "Et tu, Brute," you too, Brutus. will stab Caesar to death on the floor of the Senate. And by the way, it would be right underneath this statue of Pompey. He would be killed on this underneath the statue of Pompey. All right, well, but one thing that happened in those years, right, after Pompey was killed by the Ptolemaic king, is that Julius Caesar takes his army to Egypt, and he makes Egypt a client state. In other words, they're semi-independent. Your leaders can still run the place. You still can make all this money, whatever, but you're allied with us and you're kind of under our protection. And the truth is, they had weakened over time and they were having a struggle. There was this young kid named Cleopatra who felt like it was her right to become the next pharaoh. And her brother wanted it too. So they've got this internal struggle. It's kind of like Romulus and Remus, civil war, right? I mean, basically, they're fighting for control. And what happens is interesting is that when Caesar's coming in, everybody knows he's coming, right? She has herself wrapped up in a blanket or something like that. It was kind of like a bedroll, that you'd put over a bed or something. Had herself wrapped up, snuck out to sea, intercepted the ship that Caesar was on, and all of a sudden, hey, we got a gift for you. Vroom. And out she comes. She totally seduced Julius Caesar and got him to support her claim to the throne. Now, there's a lot more to the story there, to give you the highlights, but they had a famous affair. And the famous affair would be, let's see, I guess I didn't have it here. Oh, we'll talk about the next famous affair that she has. Okay, so sorry, I'm missing a slide, and my apologies. But nevertheless, I'll explain the story to you. So she then has a child by Julius Caesar. Caesarion was his name. Caesar, young Caesar, that's what it meant. Little Caesar. She even travels to Rome. Everybody knows her. She's supposed to be one of the most beautiful people on the planet at the time, and she's supposed to be, whatever. But she comes into this story as Caesar's lover, if you will. And nobody thinks too much of it yet, but they're about to change their minds because some things are going to happen that are going to lead to Cleopatra becoming central to the story. So I have to introduce her now. And we'll go and she just sees her. Here's a famous picture of her, right? This is Byzantine era. And here's Caesarion, right? The young son, little Caesar. And she did it so she could control Egypt, right? Instead of her brother, all of that. Okay, then for Cleopatra and for Caesarion and for everybody else, all the soldiers that fought with Julius Caesar, he gets assassinated on the floor of the Senate. What to do? The conspirators, they hang around Rome thinking they're the big heroes, right? But the public mood wasn't there. They quickly found that Caesar had a lot of allies. And one of them was one of his famous generals who worked alongside Caesar for his whole campaign. There was a title for him, I think, it's the Keeper of the Horse. I think that was the title. Keeper of the Horse was like vice president, okay, vice general. You're like the general. You're the person managing everything for the general, the keeper of the horse. Like you're holding the horse for the leader, but because you're doing that, you're the most trusted. And his name was Marcus Antonius, or Antony. We call him Mark Antony. We call him Mark Antony in English, right? There was another guy that had a big army and whatever. He kind of took over Crassus's army for what it's worth, but his name was Lepidus. So Lepidus and Antony, they somehow get saddled with a third person. Now, this third person is a bit of a mystery because what happens is when Caesar dies, everybody just assumes Mark Antony, the keeper of the horse, is going to be the next person in charge. He inherited all of the military. He inherited a lot of the wealth. He's all set, to take over. He was a great military general himself. But Caesar did something weird in his will. He adopted a grandnephew by the name of Octavian, who was only 19 years old. I don't think he planned on dying so soon, but he had picked this kid out to groom him to rule Rome, I guess. We don't know what his thinking was, but Antony was not happy about it. And all of a sudden, this 19-year-old out of nowhere is adopted by Julius Caesar in his will. It's called posthumously, right after he died. Now, Octavian was interesting. Like I said, he adopted by Caesar, joins forces though. Now, here's what he did. He got the loyalty of Caesar's troops because he took on the name of Caesar, which you could do legally if you were adopted. So he became, instead of Octavian, which is kind of a weird sounding name, Octavian, to Gaius Julius Caesar, which was Caesar's name, Octavius. The troops loved it. They had been loyal to somebody named Gaius Julius Caesar for 10 years. And by golly, if this kid was who Caesar wanted to replace him, who am I to argue with that? And he got the support of Caesar's loyal troops. Now, he didn't have as many troops as Antony. He didn't have as much money as Antony, but he was now a force to be reckoned with. Antony couldn't just get rid of him because Caesar had spoken in his will. This creates a really awkward thing called the second triumvirate. So first triumvirate, 3 generals, you got to know who they are. Second triumvirate, 3 generals, you got to know who they are. And you notice now, Rome's not being run by the Senate anymore, is it? It's whoever has the strongest army. Maybe it is a little bit like Alexander the Great, to the strongest. Because we already had one civil war between Caesar and Pompey. We're about to have another. In fact, this will be the 3rd civil war because Marius and Sulla, remember, they fought one too. So there's all these civil wars going on. All right, well, Mark Antony is not happy, obviously. And here's the very famous statue of Mark Antony. This is actually the statue that, one like it, that Caesar was killed right underneath that statue. Mark Antony became Caesar's master of the horse, his right-hand man, his lead guy, his second in command. Now, after Caesar's death, Mark Antony, they divide up Egypt again. They divide up Rome again. So basically, Octavian, later we're going to call him Augustus, but Octavian gets where Caesar used to have. And then all the Crassus area, and that goes to Antony. And then leave Lepidus there in Rome. So they split it out again, just like the first triumvirate had done. But Antony gets first pick, right? And he picks the wealthiest part, which is the Greek part and the Egyptian part. And the first thing he does is he sails to Egypt to see how much money he's got. Now, he traveled to Egypt already and had met Cleopatra. He knew full well that there was a love affair between Caesar and there was a child. He wanted Egypt, wealth, and guess what? He wanted that to pay for new armies and whatever. And so he went and courted Cleopatra. They became an item. Antony, during his lifetime, was married 4 separate times, but this would be his last marriage. The weird part is the marriage just before, if he didn't really get married with Cleopatra, they just had an affair. But his last marriage was to the sister of Octavian. Octavian had offered up his sister, okay, as a bride to cement their relationship so they wouldn't fight, so they'd be family. Well, he just sent Octavia, was her name, sent her home, divorced her. Okay. Then he has one of the most, how should I say it, the biggest love affair maybe in world history. These two, it appears, genuinely fell in love. They were closer to the same age. Caesar was 30 years older than Cleopatra. Antony was more her age. He looked like he controlled all of Rome at the moment. Octavian was nobody. She had a son that was direct descendant of Julius Caesar. She had a lot of money, and Antony had the army. And oh, by the way, Egypt had a big navy too. So it looked like all the advantages are going to to Mark Antony in Egypt. Octavian, on the other hand, did something very clever. Octavian decides that he's going to spend the next 10 years causing doubt on the actions of Mark Antony, that he was cavorting with a foreign queen, that she had somehow seduced him and she was in his head and Antony was going to follow her will, and they were going to move the capital of Rome from Rome, and Antony and Cleopatra were going to rule from Alexandria, Egypt. It was basically what we call xenophobia, fear of foreigners, right? So this woman who traveled to Rome, who everybody seemed to think was cool for a while, now she becomes literally public enemy number one. Number one. The Roman Senate declared her a traitor because of Octavian's constant propaganda efforts against him. Now, here's the deal. This means civil war, right? Now, Octavian was a terrible general. He was awful. But he had a friend by the name of Marcus Agrippa. Agrippa was the real deal. He was an expert. And it was Agrippa with Octavian's army that will actually fight Mark Antony. Now, Octavian also had a fleet, right? But so did Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And the final place where the two fleets met, with armies on both sides, right? Armies on one land bit, water in the middle, the Adriatic Sea, and then army there. Basically, this battle at sea is called the Battle of Actium. And it's the decisive engagement in the final war of the Roman Republic between Octavian and Mark Antony. Okay, I'll show you a map here in a second, right? Here's the battle lines. Basically, you have this kind of peninsula area, and you have Antony and his fleet, Cleopatra's fleet, with Cleopatra there at the time, Mark Antony there with this group, and they had this kind of crescent, which should have been a good defensive formation. But then Agrippa comes in and he manages to surround them. And then when he attacks, he's a superior naval officer. Now, you also should know that Antony had his army stationed here and here. And then Agrippa also ordered his troops down to put pressure and to block them off on this peninsula. So basically, the bulk of Antony's army got trapped. They were, of course, depending on their navy to save them. But when Agrippa broke through and started to win this battle, Antony and Cleopatra panic. They fight their way out through the blockade and leaving their army and their navy behind. Many of those troops and many of those ships now joined Octavian. They sailed then back to Egypt. I'm going to go to another map here. They sailed back to Egypt with Octavian and Agrippa in close pursuit. And then they committed suicide with snakes, asps, in one of the most famous moments in all of Roman history. What a story. Okay, come on, you can't make this stuff up, right? This is great stuff in terms of history and storytelling, in terms of lessons learned and opportunities lost. If Antony at any moment had broken away from Cleopatra, said, oh, no, man, I'm going to come back to Rome. Octavian would never have had this chance to make him sound like such a traitor. And if he'd had the courage to fight with his troops on that last few days, he was worried about Cleopatra's safety, I would bet. What a story. So then Octavian wins with the help of Marcus Vespianus Agrippa. Agrippa is really the war hero here. And he gave Octavian all the credit. He said, oh yeah, this Octavian, Octavian probably during this naval battle, they suggest that he was seasick and he was below decks throwing up the whole time. In every battle he tried to fight, he ended up losing. Somebody else had to bail him out. So a general he was not. But what he would grow into be was one of the greatest administrators ever. He could run a government. He could figure out new ways of doing things. And basically, he created a working imperial system of government. Means he invented the empire. Julius Caesar had made himself dictator and would have probably gone that direction, but he was killed before he had a chance to fully complete his plans. This guy fully completed the plans and forever removed the Senate as the true power, although he kept him around as a fiction. Because see, he'd learned from Julius Caesar's mistakes. First, Julius Caesar was arrogant about it. I defeated you. I'm in charge. Come kiss my ring, humiliate yourself in front of me because I'm so cool. I'm part God anyway, you know that, right? Octavian never did that. What Octavian did was to try to treat everybody nicely, be very polite to the senators and whatever. But when he was done, he created a new system of taxes and administration, which kept Rome wealthy for the next 200 years. He kept a professional standing army. Oh, by the way, he also inherited all of Egypt. And that was the wealthiest part of the Mediterranean. And that was his piggy bank that he could use to build public works, meaning he would build aqueducts and he'd improve the harbor and build sports facilities and bathhouses. They were big on taking baths, like gymnasium. Think like a gymnasium, right? With a swimming pool. That's kind of what you should think about when you talk about it. But he did all these things, expanded the roads, paid the soldiers well, because now he had the money to do it. Now, the senators pretended to still be in charge. He still sent them out as military combatants, provincial governors, administrators, all that kind of thing, out there to defend the frontiers. But what this guy does, Octavian does, is he changes his name and he solidifies the empire. No more running out here and picking fights with people just to pick the fight. If it's not going to add strength, we're not going to go there. We're going to consolidate our victories, maximize our profits, maximize this whole thing, and be very careful going to war in the future, right? So yes, they're going to add territory over time, but it's going to be now slow and more thoughtful, because you can get too big. You can get so big that you lose control of the whole situation. I think he understood that. So basically then he picks defensible boundaries and defends them. For example, the Danube River right here. This Dacia wasn't part of it yet. So he picked defensible places. Here's the Rhine River. He said, we're not going to grow past our defensible boundaries. And we're going to build roads to all this. And we're going to just, do a better job of running the place. But don't kid yourself. He became the absolute ruler. He maintained the fiction of the Republican institutions like the Senate. He let them pretend to be in charge, but he was truly in charge. Now, I'm going to jump ahead and talk about the other clever thing he did. He knew that the course of honor, that dignitas, mattered to these rich nobility. So he let them go ahead and play that little game. They would still elect 2 consuls every year, 2 tribunes. They'd still go through the course of honor. They'd still be put in charge of armies and go out there. But he had all of those powers given to him without the title. I've got the powers of consuls. I got the power of tribune. I've got the power of the religious head of Rome. I've got all these powers, but I'm not taking them. I just got them in case I need them. And we'll let you guys kind of play with it. And if I don't like what you're doing, then I'll take it away from you. But go ahead. So it was a fiction that he created. And then he created titles for himself, which accurately described the power he became. Now, here's the other key to Octavian. He lived a long time, like Cyrus the Great. Alexander didn't live so long. Look what happened. Here he lives forever. He outlasted 4 of his successors that he'd handpicked. He lived longer than his grandchildren. So he's able to solidify power. And so by the time he dies, nobody has known a different way to live. Nobody can see from here on in how they can survive without an emperor. And here's how he created it. He thought, well, I can't take the title Romulus. That'd be a good title, right? Romulus, the founder of Rome, because he was a king. So you can't do that. All right. So instead, I'm going to call myself Augustus. And that's what we call him now. So Octavian now becomes Augustus in history. And Augustus means pious, lover of the gods, but it also means, kind of has a dual meaning, some divinity too, that you're on equal terms with the gods, that you're the one communicating with the gods. So it's kind of like a pharaoh status. Then he has himself called the princeps civitatis, which means the number one citizen of the city, the first among equals. It's the origin of our word prince today. The word prince comes from princeps. So he becomes the first citizen of Rome, the number one citizen of Rome, the first among equals. But doesn't that kind of imply that he's like more equal than everybody else? Then imperator, that shout that says, the troops say, yeah, you be our leader because you've earned it. So he became the imprimatur. And that's where the word empire comes from. That's where the word emperor comes from. And then here's the clincher, pater patriae, which means the father of his country. Now you're all thinking, oh, father of your country, isn't that wonderful? Like George Washington, you know, he's this guy and he's honest and nice and all this kind of stuff. Warm father figure, not in Roman history. In Roman life, the father was the absolute controller of his family. You guys remember that if you're going to survive in a family, you have to be picked up as a child by the father. Roman fathers had the power of life and death over their own family members, not to mention slaves. So when he took this father of his country, that meant, oh, yeah, oh, gee, that's like dad. He kind of runs everything. So when we think warm figure, father of his country, well, George Washington was that warm figure, was the father of his country. He got that same imprimatur from the people of America, but they bestowed it on him willingly. He took this on himself, but it had a very different meaning in Rome. In Rome, it meant, yeah, I'm in charge, and you just do what I say because I'm dad. Whoa, very different than the way we would see that term. So here's what he also does well. He lives a modest lifestyle. He doesn't try to make it look like he's profited, but he may have been the wealthiest person that ever lived on the planet, ever. So he had this wealth, he had this power, he had everything, and he did it in kind of in the shadows. So it looked like it was still a republic, but it wasn't. It was a good old-fashioned empire run by an emperor, one guy, and his name was Augustus. And he outlived everybody. So that meant it stuck. And then that leads us to a discussion of his successors, which we call the Julio-Claudians. And this is an interesting thing. We're going to wind this down in the next lecture. We'll be pretty much done with that. And I'm kind of looking at the clock, and I really don't want to get into successors right now, because once we start, you know, it's kind of like a bobsled run. It's going to go pretty fast. So why don't we call a halt to it for today? But you guys get ready for that election tomorrow, because it's going to be a really, really important thing. All right. Well, let me check out for a minute. I'll be back in about 5 minutes because I've got to make sure this records for the students at home.